Yo, what's up everybody? My name's Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today, you and I are going to be taking a very simple sound, which is just a detuned saw wave. And I think that we are going to do something kind of similar to what I've got here, but maybe we'll start from scratch. But basically it sounds like this now. If you don't know my channel, I'm pretty much the neuro-based guy. Not that I'm coining that title, but more so just I'm the person that continues to cover this 5 years later. So the premise behind something like Infiltrator is using as many effects as we can, which is really just a combination of effects like filtering and distortion to basically create that cool movement. And it's not really so much of just like stacking filters and then just calling it a day. It's more so about being aware of certain frequency ranges in which to bring certain movements or vowels out, if you will. So yeah, if you like this, then be sure to like and subscribe. I've got a giveaway going at 20K subscribers where we will be giving away a copy of DisTube Culture, which this thing is awesome. It just slams stuff and you can get some really gnarly sounds just by fattening it up. I use this on drums. I use this on all different kinds of things. I have a review on it. Go check it out. But today we are going to be taking a look at Infiltrator. So I have to do a little bit of reverse engineering with this because even though there are multi-stage envelopes, they don't repeat unless if you set them to a sequence. But even still, if we were to change everything into a relatively slow amount, then we can use stuff like the retrigger here to be able to randomize the starting point of the multi-stage envelope. So if I were to change this into something like a bandpass, and you can use any of these, it doesn't really matter, and we can kind of double click around here, then whenever this triggers via both audio and MIDI, you're going to see that it's going to kind of jump around. So with that, let's go ahead and actually take this and move this back a little bit. And we're going to focus on this middle frequency range right here just to pull something out and get started. You see how when it gets a little bit too high, it goes kind of like a cat, like wow. We don't really want that. We want to keep everything low. Yeah, that's about good. So now that we have it, we can actually back off of the mix on this, which is something that makes this really cool. Most filters don't have a mix and other effect or like multi-effect plugins. So that's really cool that the bandpass has something like this. So let's go ahead and crank the drive. And now that we have that, it's just a starting point, but we can start to use this to create movement patterns and stuff. So this is pretty much the name of the game. We're going to be focusing on this low frequency range right here in order to kind of, I guess, get the most, like weird movement from the middle frequencies as possible. And then we'll make up for it with adding some distortion here in a second. But let's see what a notch filter sounds like in the same frequency range. We also need to kind of make this jump around. I'm going to set this to a relatively low speed and also change these guys on. So it's not bad. Let's go ahead and add some distortion now. And we don't really need to do much with this. We really just need to make sure that the low pass is turned up all the way. If you want to automate distortion, like you're more than welcome to, which we can kind of do something like this. I want this to kind of stay relatively at the top. So if at all possible, we want this to kind of go slow as this is moving around and hopefully pull stuff out. And really distortion in relation to boosting or cutting certain frequencies is what is the main, I would say the number one thing behind making valley basses in the first place. So now that we have this, we can move this over here and turn on the drive to go not all the way up, but maybe like a little bit more than halfway. Cool. Let's go ahead and continue now. We are going to add in a comb filter, and let's go ahead and kind of focus on those mids here again. maybe turn up the resonance and back off of the attack. And we're just going to play around with this kind of moving around in certain places and slow it down. And then we can, for one, see how it sounds. Cool, we can also add a phaser to this. And with this phaser, we kind of want to do the same thing to where, again, we're really just focusing on those low mids here. We don't want it to be all the way. I know that I've said that a lot, but I mean, it's true. It's really just like, you know, I'm sure if you've watched a neurobase tutorial before, you know that like it's always like, oh, distort, filter, EQ, distort, filter, EQ. But where the magic really lies is controlling what specific areas sound good. And every single plugin has different algorithms, and you know the effects themselves usually sound very different. So even though they could be like a phaser or whatever, it still could have a different characteristic. So you're gonna have to kind of use your ears and listen to what starts to sound cool. And don't think that like you're gonna put one effect on it and then it's gonna fix the whole thing. You kind of have to build slowly over time, and that's the beauty behind how, to me, these basses are sculpted. Yeah, so this is pretty cool, but it's a little much, so we're gonna back off of this just a bit. Awesome. Let's go ahead and do another instance of distortion here. And we're just gonna let this one be. We don't need this. We can add another notch to kind of play with cutting that around. And maybe something around this region here. I'm also going to have to go back and turn on that low pass stuff, because for whatever reason that likes to Let's go ahead and add a delay now. And we want to switch this over to free and turn this down because we don't want this to be like super crazy. But we'll start from the bottom and then kind of work our way up with this and kind of just let this jump around as well. And again, I'm not really too worried about anything right now. I think once I start to get all these effects kind of stacked up against each other, then I'll go back and start to tweak them and start to see how I can create like a more interesting interaction between them. So obviously that's a little bit much. We're going to back off the mix a little bit more, and then maybe even back off of this guy a little bit more as well. And you can hear right now that it's relatively quiet. We've got plenty of headroom, so that's great because we're going to drive this and distort it at the end. But yeah, using coloration and stuff is usually a really good idea, just because it allows you to characterize or to give you a little bit more interesting results just from like having all the movement. And then if you send it into something that has a little bit of stereo, then usually you can get some cool phasing effects. But that's part of the reason why we focus on the middle band, because if you do that, then you can not disrupt the sub frequencies or the low end of whatever it is that you're doing. And there are certain use cases to where you do want to do that, but even still, that's where you would use something like multipass or something as a high pass filter. That's great because that means that we're going to leave the sub alone, especially if we're wanting to like use the original character of the bass as opposed to like layering or something. People ask me all the time, they're like, yo, are you supposed to like use a different sub and all that? And the answer is yes and no. It just depends on like what the sound is, right? So we're gonna pull off the pre-delay here. Cool, and see, that's gonna give that a little bit of space here, which I think is really nice. And I actually like that, even though it sounds super digital, I actually like that it's kind of slapbacky, because once we have all that and we've got our spaces and stuff, now what we can do is create different stuff on this to where we've got this repeating. So we can also set this to go like this. And we don't want this to go into bipolar mode because we don't want this to be all the way at the bottom. We really want to focus on only letting it go down to a certain point, so that way we don't lose the sub. So like slowly but surely you can hear that even though this is super quiet, you can hear that the characteristics are there. And now that you have that, the easy part comes in to where we can just drive and compress this to make it really loud. I'd recommend using the maximizer compression because that's kind of like well, it's going to maximize it, but maximization is like also a means of limiting. So if you push everything up and you turn the compression all the way up, it's going to sound much louder now. I am going to back off of this drive because sometimes that will ruin the sound, but now that we have this, it's going to be much louder. And then we can go back and we can drive this. Cool. So there's a couple of other things that we can do here. For example, you see that there's some stuff that has these knobs on here. And even though we can't do everything like we would, say, I don't know, in either multipass or snap heap or something, we can use this external envelope to create a little bit more movement and play around with the stereo field just a little bit more. And to do that, you need to go down to this and you need to go down to this drop menu, select envelope 2 and pick whatever it is that you want, which would be a list of whatever is available on here. But it's not necessary entirely, and you don't have to do this, but sometimes it can be kind of cool to vary that a little bit more. But really that's what I like about Infiltrator and these multi-effects is, you know, even though the modulation system is different in between all of them, we're trying to find something that, you know, creates a dynamic interaction between all of them. And for me, I'm always about randomization because I like to make stuff not the same every time. So if I were to give you this patch or something, then I would want you to get different results out of it and not just the same exact thing, just because I feel like it extends the shelf life of each patch. The flip side of that is sometimes it can make it kind of arbitrary because you might spend a really long time starting to get picky. But even still, I'd rather have like more chances of inspiration as opposed to like this one thing does one thing. So, you know, it is what it is. But let's see what that sounds like now. I do wish that the notch had some play here with what happens in the frequency range, but I am going to kind of move this around a little bit higher. And then let me see where this is balancing out at. So now that we have something like this, if you just play it as is, you might get some different stuff that sounds okay, as you can hear, but the magic happens whenever you turn the sequencer on. So if you were to highlight all of these, and we got to do this one by one, but if we were to kind of just, I'm just clicking on this and dragging down, so I guess I could do it that way, that might be a little bit easier, but if you do it like this, then what this is going to do is every time this steps, it's going to create a completely different position and completely different amount or placement on these multi-stage envelopes, as you can see, that are going to continually make this somewhat random, or at least a little less predictable. So now that we have that, we can take a listen and see what we have. Cool. Now, I do think that we went a little bit overboard with the distortion, so maybe I can try to find a nice balance in between the two, but we don't want it to be like so crushed that it's going to ruin the rest of the sound. We really want to try to find something that, a nice middle ground in between that will give us both a good amount of distortion and be nice and beefy, but still have the clean filtering, or relatively clean filtering, that helps shape the vowels. If you overpower the distortion with the vowel movement, it just sounds like smudge. So again, like playing Goldilocks is probably the biggest skill that I would want you to take away from this, as opposed to actually formalizing this as a patch of the whole. We can also try maybe using like a ladder or something in comparison to the different slopes and filter types. See, that sounds a little bit cleaner to me. So you definitely want to get in here and try to experiment with these different filters and whatnot. And also, you can, if you really want to, try to use something like a formant filter in replace of something like a notch if you want. It doesn't always sound amazing, but what's cool is that you can kind of see this over on the left, and I do believe that this will create these vowels for you that will be somewhat peaky. Now, for me personally, I would like these to be like up and down. I do think that, yeah, you can switch between this, so this might actually be a better way to go. But what you would probably want to do is back off of the mix here, because we don't want this to be the whole thing. So I don't know, let's see what that sounds like. So that's not too bad. And again, if it's just like a one static sound, it's usually not that interesting. But if you were to do a couple different things with, say, your generator here. It's a little phasey, but again, that's probably just my own personal taste and what it is I'm looking for. But even still, you know, you can mess around with this and start to find your own possibilities and things that you like just by using this as a framework. And of course, at any point in time, you can always, you know, jump off and start to do extra things, or you can stack different infiltrators. So for example, I have this other rack that is more focused on like not spectral, but like more spatial things that if we go to the user here, it should be the Smorgle. And you'll see that this is just like FM, this is a vowel filter, notch, scatter, smear, notch, reflect. You can see like it's mostly spatial on all of these, but what it will do is it will, in theory, enhance the spatial movement of the first infiltrator. So and sometimes, you know, it just kind of doesn't really help out and it makes everything sound a little bit more smeared, but just as a possibility, you know that you can add on to that. Or if you really wanted to, you can always take that and, you know, add your other multi-effects on here. It's really hard to like talk about Neurobase without mentioning something like multipass or snap heap or something, but why not? If you have it, then, you know, use what you got to create these different variations and make everything sound kind of neat. So that's pretty wild. Yeah, or switch them up. So you know, put this one beforehand and then use this on Infiltrator. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So in any case, though, you can see, like, even if I were to compare this, we have the same thing of, you know, multiple filters, multiple filters, delay, distortion, flanger, chorus, phaser, but really, in the end of the day, it's complex filtering along with distortion. And even though you only have, I mean, I guess you have this, but for the most part, you've only pretty much got like one band filters. It doesn't mean that you can't kind of like make use out of it. And the fact that most of these have drive means that you can add distortion along the way in little tiny increments. So it changes, and it's going to give you a different sound, but it is important to understand like what's actually happening. So that way you can find your own possibilities and you can make your own sounds. So I guess one last thing that I'll leave you with is that if you were to change this into something like a donk or whatever, so I got this thing here, I believe. We will just start from this guy. So if you have something kind of like this, that's just kind of like a donk or something that, yeah. Right, it's nothing crazy. There we go. Then when you turn this back on, if you were to change this into the audio follower here instead, then you might be able to get some interesting movement that is supposed to be following along the lines of the sound as a percussive sound, as opposed to something that's sustained and like trying to create unpredictable movement. You can also do a combination of both. It doesn't really matter, but let's just, for the sake of having a good time, see, sorry it's getting dark, but see if we can do something else that's interesting. So. Yeah, so you see you're getting a much different sound out of this that I think is pretty interesting. So we can also kind of go back and focus on what part of the sound we actually want to. Yeah, so you see how we're getting like much different stuff now that's creating, you know, a very different type of sound, but don't think that you just have to send this into a Reese. You can, hey. Sorry, she sees herself in the reflection. But from that, you can get a lot of different results by using the same patch. It doesn't have to be applied to a sustained bass. It's just kind of like changing the approach to how you might want to use this as a whole. So anyways, hopefully that was helpful to you all. Hopefully it gives you some ideas for inspiration. They're really just like, I'm really just theory crafting here. So, you know, if you don't like the sound or whatever, that's totally fine. It's kind of just a matter of hopefully giving you some options in which to explore if you already have tools like this. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe and like the video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.